Thanks everybody for joining us here today. I just wanted to have some time to talk to you with Doug Lubahn. So one of the first things I'd like to talk about is basically we wanted to make sure that during this conversation, these are regular chats that Doug and I have, and we just wanted to make sure that if there are any questions, please ask them on the way through. So I'd like to actually introduce you to a colleague of mine, Doug Lubahn. We've known each other for many years now, and I thought our regular conversations are really so interesting. I thought the rest of the audience would really value these conversations. So with that, I'd like to sort of introduce you to Doug and maybe talk about some of his storied career in cyber investigations. So where do we start? Doug Lubahn was first lieutenant commander for the Michigan State Police. It's basically a who's who of law enforcement during that period. I mean, he was law enforcement liaison investigations, regional director of the investigations team. And then he moved over to, interestingly, to Absolute Software, where he was also in charge of healthcare investigations, team and risk management. And now he's an amazing virtual CISO. And Doug and I met when we were back at Absolute Software together, and we had some many really interesting conversations at the time. So I thought it might be a really great idea for everyone to sort of be a fly on the wall effectively and listen to some of the interesting conversations we have. He's a valued advisor to myself and really the Black Fog team about what really goes on in cyber investigations, and really comes up with some really great use case scenarios for us, and that's able to translate into maybe what the company's doing in terms of development, etc. So as I said, please ask questions on the way through. And I'd just like to get started by welcoming you first, Doug, and then I'd maybe like to talk a little bit about talking about the recent conversations we've had, perhaps, and some of maybe the technologies that you were using in the past, Doug, and maybe how they relate to cybersecurity and really cyberbullying, and then maybe we'll just let it roll from there and see where the conversation goes. Okay. And thanks for joining us today, Doug.
Well, you're most welcome, and thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on this forum. So, yeah, as Darren said, I'm retired from the state police, and then my second career in cybersecurity is still ongoing, and love it. I'm very passionate about it. But to kind of lay a little bit of groundwork as far as my deep cyber investigations experience comes from my 10 years at Absolute Software, and then honestly pushing forward to current times as well. But during the 10 years, I started, at first it was all just about the device. There wasn't really a whole lot of focus on the data or any of that. And that all really started to change across the globe in the early 2010s, 2010, 2011, 2012. And some of it was compliance driven, most of it was actually use driven, because the advent of the smaller handheld personal computers, the cell phones containing so much data, the mobile workforce really starting off. So all of that became a real, it presented its own risk factors. So, and that was, in turn, it changed my focus internally as far as from just recovering, a stolen device to helping the data owner protect that data and put it to their advantage, use the data to their advantage. And, we can also fast forward, which somewhere in the conversation today, I'm sure we're going to get talking about today's world, which is with ransomware and all the current threats that we're facing. Mm-hmm. But during, I'll say it's probably, well, we all know here in the United States, with the schools becoming so integrated with a one-to-one issue of computers to their students, and everything becoming computer-based learning. Mm-hmm. The risks and the challenges that presented became massive.
And even more so now, I guess, with COVID, etc., because everyone's at home effectively, like my kids are, like everyone, probably Zooming in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if you're not, if you're not fortunate enough to have your kids going to in person, they're actually doing blended here in Michigan. I mean, we've got people that 100% remote, 100% on site, and we've got the blend as well, and the risks that brings.
Right.
But, so there was another major event here in the United States that really drove some action, And, we had the Columbine school shooting and massacre in late 1999.
Yeah.
And then in 2012, I think it was early 2012, we had the Sandy Hook shooting in Connecticut. Another massive tragedy, and absolutely but it was a key event that changed the focus again of school and school security. And and that affected my world, because at that time we were engaged with the vast majority of the largest school districts in the country, in the United States. And we're trying to come up with some type of a product and offering that could help detect this, help prevent it, help alert the officials, law enforcement, and whatnot. So we started, and I was on the project team. We started a DLP, a data loss prevention project, specifically geared towards trying to come up with a service line and a product offering towards fitting that need, because the kids, at the vast majority of the schools, they were all one-to-one, as far as each
Sure.
student had a laptop, and all their programs and all their lessons, everything was being done online. A lot of the schools, you put it back in the 2012 era, a lot of the schools were still kind of, reluctant to let the kids take the devices home, but that also was changing. So, so again, with that became more risks, because you can't control you had less control of the network, you had less control of what they were doing on the device. So we started working on, and in fact, it was a fairly long project, but we started working on developing a product based on a DLP solution, where it was going to have built-in lexicons for keywords that were key to cyberbullying, to any type of school attacks, any type of violence. So the violence and the cyberbullying were the two key things that we were really focusing on. And it became quickly evident that when we're starting to talk to all of our school officials from all around the country, that there were so many variables in the lingo, the language, the lexicons that the students were using.
Because you were talking about abbreviations and context and all that sort of stuff?
Yep, yeah. And one of the biggest problems that we faced, Darren, was that the words that would just mean nothing, they would mean absolutely nothing to you or I, would mean a whole lot to the kids. And this was so regional and locally different from all around the country. I'll share a quick example with you. This was actually a completely different story, but it goes to the same point. In the prison lingo, the word gloves means a weapon. And actually, a friend of mine, a former colleague of mine, was murdered on duty from two escapees from a prison. And the one escapee had asked his partner to go to he says, "Can you bring me my gloves?" It was totally innocent to the troop, but
Sure.
What it meant was for him to bring the weapon, and that's what he did. He brought the weapon, and then they actually killed. But the same exact theory applies to the students in the schools. And it was also so quickly changing. Their lingo and their form of youth, when I say that, the kids' form of communication just varies so rapidly that it was next to impossible to create, a list of keywords, a lexicon list of keywords that would be applicable to, for more than a month or so, because it's so rapidly changing. So
That's interesting.
It was great intent. The intent, the purpose was all there. We had all sorts of backing from the industry, the school safety industry, of course, from law enforcement all across the globe. Because at that time, we were a global law enforcement, partner. We had successful investigations in 114 countries.
Wow.
Across the globe.
Do you think the technology's changed a little bit now? I mean, I know that some of the technologies that I've looked at, certainly for cyberbullying, etc., they still effectively using lexicons. They're just a little bit more intelligent from the perspective of using a little bit of AI, but they're still prone to the same problems. They're not really perfect. What are your experiences on that side?
So I think that the experience that I can share in that regard, Darren, is that I think that the core problem to a lexicon list or a DLP being a real solution that's going to be functional, is the fact that the communication, the language that the kids use, and nowadays it's almost all, you know, text. It's abbreviations.
Good point.
You know, I mean, I've got grandkids from the age of 11 to 18, and, you know, they laugh when they, you know, I'll say, well, what does that mean? And it's like, well, that's not what you said it meant.
Right. Hey, I totally hear you. And I have a daughter and a son and teenagers, and it's like, can you just write me an entire sentence instead of all this? I don't even know what you just said. And my wife says, God, you're so old. You don't. And it's like, yeah, I know, but you know, I just don't know some of these abbreviations. And as you say, they change all the time. So really interesting. And, you know, it's one of the things that, you know, I know you and I spoke about when we first met, which I think was back 2012. And I'd sort of, you know, got to know you guys in the police investigations unit, etc. And I sort of said to you, what do you think about this idea, right? And this was all about data exfiltration, and that's how we got onto it. And you said, you know, that's really interesting. And this is how our relationship effectively started, which I thought was really, really cool. And I guess we've been talking for pretty much every month, pretty much regularly ever since. So so thanks for advising us, etc. So I guess what I'd like to do now is maybe move on to a couple of other things, because this is also close to home for a lot of corporations out there these days. And that's the problem with insider threats. Insider threats, we often talk to customers about, you know, what have you got running already? But what they don't realize is that there's often a lot of latent advanced persistent threats already present within the organization, and a lot of insider threats. And you had some really great use cases, and importantly, some really interesting investigations you've done in the past. So maybe talk to us a little bit about that and your philosophy about behavioral nature of individuals.
Yeah, certainly. So on the insider threat, and so many of my cases, and I personally conducted over 2,000 cyber investigations myself, and you know, the number for the team, I can't remember what the number was, but the number was tens of thousands, or actually over 100,000. And the key thing to understand is that about 2/3 of our cases came with criminal charges. So that's pretty significant. I mean, all the way up to and including, you know, murder. I was involved in 2 murder investigations. So, I mean, these aren't just somebody stealing a laptop. These are things that people did, you know, then help, you know, using the stolen laptops and the cyber evidence that we were coming up with, the forensic evidence, you know, led to, like I said, it was approximately 2/3 of our cases were tied to criminal charges. So it wasn't just that.
Wow, that's a lot. And this is a private organization. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. Yep. And it was all, you know, it was all based on our relationships too, because we trained law enforcement, and then the partnership, the hand-in-hand partnership. We never worked as an agent of them. We worked completely independent on behalf, you know, of the customer. But our cyber capabilities and our ability to put together a case, because we were all retired cops, we knew what to look for. You know, and so that was kind of a win-win for everybody, the victim, the whole works. So in the healthcare space, that was another thing, you know, kind of like the Columbine and then Sandy Hook. You know, it went from being a data or a device-driven focus to, because, you know, the $3,000 laptops were a thing of the past. Laptops
right now they're $500, so no one cares about the device.
No, it wasn't. That was a non-issue. But it was what was on there, and then it was also the potential end violation with the HIPAA fines, you know, coming through from OCR, and the massive, you know, breach costs to that end, and now it's rolled into ransomware. But roll back to the insider threat. To me, and I've spoken to this many, many times, humans are creatures of habit, and the things that people do are very predictable, very definable, very identifiable, and very reactionable, which is the most important thing. And I'll share a good example with you. This was actually, I can't say it was one of my earlier cases, but it was one of my first real big healthcare success cases. There was a large healthcare organization in Southeast Michigan that they did not know it, but they were losing, 2 to 4 laptops pretty much every day. And
every day, geez.
yeah, yes, every day.
Wow.
And it was such a big organization, they really didn't know it. They just,
Okay. Wow.
migration drift, they thought, or they really weren't sure. But when it started closing in on the 100 laptop number, they were like, okay, there's a problem here. There's something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so they actually came on board, became a partner with us, became a customer. I started working the cases because then we were able to start working some of these cases. And again, 2 to 4 laptops almost every day of the week. And the crazy thing was these laptops were showing up all over the United States. I mean, we had some showing up in Canada. I can't remember the other countries, but there was 2 or 3 countries, and then mainly in the United States. Common point was they were all being sold on eBay. The new user had bought it on eBay. But the crazy thing is that we ended up identifying like 5 different eBay accounts that these people had bought them from. So long story short, we end up serving search warrants, myself and a detective from down in the city, down in the Detroit metro area, served search warrants on eBay. We got a bunch of the records. Well, the crazy thing was all 5 of the eBay accounts ended up coming back to a boyfriend, girlfriend who both worked at this hospital, and they were both entry-level employees. I think the guy was on the maintenance staff, and the gal was, I believe she was a candy striper. She was either a nurse in training or a candy striper. But the crazy thing was, oh my, what's shocker of shocks? Any day they were working, there was 2 to 4 laptops stolen. So depending if they each took 2 or that day, or if they each took 1.
I'm amazed no one didn't miss them. That's just incredible.
Yeah. So again, long story short, we ended up charging them their original formal charges. They were each facing 77 felonies. And,
whoa.
Yeah, we did a search warrant on their house. They both happened to be home, and there was stolen devices in ready, plain open view as myself and the detective walked in. Right on the one coffee table, on a little nightstand over here. It's kind of like there was computers everywhere, and they were all stolen from this particular healthcare. But the key thing that I always talk about to this is that the human behavior of it is so predictable. Again, they, had you been able to find out about this way earlier in the process and identify it, you wouldn't have had to suffer the loss of over 100 laptops. And, the data risk that healthcare organization faced was absolutely massive.
Right. So they obviously had no tools in place to measure the data loss or anything like that. So that's why they couldn't really identify anything.
No,
just
it was
hardware going missing.
It was all just physical. That okay, well, we got to do something now. There's so many of these missing. So.
Wow, that's incredible.
There's another really good story too, Darren. That I've got so many of them, but there was
you do. That's why we speak so often. I love speaking because of that.
There was a high-end medical laboratory down in the Chicagoland area, and they had everything that they were dealing with was really, it was all intellectual property. It was all really high-end, exploratory. They were a lab development for in the pharmaceuticals. So obviously everything on these devices was extremely valuable, not only for the intellectual property, but for the, the potential of a reportable HIPAA breach. So one weekend they end up having 2 devices come missing, and they were very concerned about them because of what was on the devices. And so they reported them to us, and in the matter of just a few days, both devices start checking in forensically, and we ended up identifying the users. And the users, now this is where it got really interesting, and we elevated it very, very quickly, but the users were obviously using these stolen devices to make fraudulent identification cards. We literally were watching them run programs, and they were making forged ID cards. And so, we worked with, started with the local law enforcement, quickly elevated it to a joint cybercrime. It was the FBI and the Secret Service, the Electronic Crimes Task Force down in the Chicago area, and because of what was going on. And so we ended up serving search warrants again at the users' locations. And our forensic data was used to give them probable cause, did the search warrants. When they went in, they had credit card machines, identification machines. They were making credit cards. They were making false IDs. They could make any state driver's license, social
That's
security.
incredible.
Yeah. So after the feds were very interested in this, just because of that connection. I mean, these people were producing, and as it ended up, one of the it was a family arrangement. Oh, I forgot to say, the computers were stolen by the midnight security guard.
So they're the ones trying to protect you, and they're the ones stealing the stuff as well. So another classic insider threat.
Yeah,
wow.
Exactly. And it was a rental or contract security operation, and
Amazing.
of course, the midnight shift. Who's going to get stuck working your midnight shifts? I mean, again, human nature. It's usually your least seniority, maybe your newest employees. Maybe you're not so trusted employees, and that's the worst place you can put them. Is put them
ones that have already got a new job and steal all your customer data. Yeah, I mean, it's a classic. We saw that a lot too.
Oh yeah,
that's really
so
interesting.
The two devices in this case, they ended up being it was family members of the midnight security guard, and one of them was already on probation for an identification fraud charge, another felony charge. So it went right back to the game because they were making money at it. I mean,
that's amazing.
Absolutely crazy.
Wow, that's really cool. Well, that's amazing stuff. I'd like to sort of turn our attention to something that's really interesting to us right now, obviously, and that's ransomware. We haven't released the statistics, but it looks as though before the end of the month that ransomware is actually an all-time higher in the month of October, and we'll be publishing these reports probably on the 1st of November. But I'd sort of like to talk to you a little bit about some of the more recent interesting developments from the federal government in the United States, and that is the recent advisory from the US Treasury that's actually stated now that any company that pays ransomware demands could be liable for sanctions. I was just wondering what your thoughts were on this, and if you thought that was going to have a really big impact on business generally.
So it is an interesting rule, and I know it just came out in early October. I believe it was like October 1st from the Department of Treasury, U.S. Treasury. And they've actually, part of their action was also where they're designating specific foreign actors. I can't remember I've got it right here, but the name OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Asset Control.
Correct.
So the U.S. Treasury is trying to control how much of this ransomware money goes to foreign actors. So part of this whole process is they're actually designating known cyber criminals and known cyber ransomware programs as foreign actors. So once that's done, then what they're doing is the intent of it is to try and help convince American companies to not pay the ransomware, with the risk, the added penalty and potential penalty of having some fines levied against them if they pay the risks.
Okay, so let me throw a little curly one in for you, because we obviously talk to insurance agencies all the time as well. So most companies actually have some form of cyber risk insurance policy these days because they just can't afford the risk otherwise. What happens if I'm now engaged with my policy and the insurance company pays that? Is my company still liable even though the insurance company paid it? I mean, does that give me protection, or are we still screwed really?
I don't know the answer to that. And it's funny you asked that, Darren, but I literally had a conversation earlier today. A good friend of mine runs the Michigan State Police cyber investigation team. And him and I talk fairly often, and I wanted to pick his brain, in advance of today's call, because things are so rapidly changing, especially with two things: the COVID and then work from home, and the additional risks there, and the additional exposure. But then also with ransomware on such a trajectory to go up. I mean, I saw a stat just yesterday, I believe it was, where the amount of ransomware attacks has gone up from either 100 to 150%, and then the dollar amount has gone up about 300%.
Right.
And
That reflects our stats as well. We're seeing the same. And and last month was a record by, I think, like 80% higher than the previous best. And this month, I don't know where the number's going to fall because it's still, what, the 28th or 29th today. So who knows where it's going to end. And I know it's already higher than it was last month. So it's crazy.
But to bring it back full circle to your comment and tie in my conversation with the commander at the State Police Cyber team, he said a couple of things. He says, number one, he says, yes, they're seeing an uptick, definitely an uptick in the number of ransomware requests and the dollar amount. So that's going hand in hand with what they're seeing. He also made the comment that there's no delineation anymore. The cyber crooks, as I'll quote him, he says, they're getting very cocky. They no longer are just going after the whales, the big corporations. They're going all the way down to, small mom and pops, anybody they can infiltrate, their network, they're going after them. But what I found really interesting, and he said the same thing, he says, this is the first time in his career that this kind of anomaly has happened. And he says, really, it's not even an anomaly. It's now become a standard. But he said, the cyber thieves, they get into your network, however they're doing it. Usually it's, a clickbait or malware or an email, whatever. They're getting into your network. They'll sit back. They'll capture their data for a while. They'll hang out in your network. Then what they're doing is they're actually sending you an email with a sample of what data they have on you. After they've exfiltrated your data, they'll send you an email with the sample to show their legitimacy, and then they'll put their request in. And the requests have gone up tremendously. But he said what is really interesting is that two things. He says, number one, a lot of people who have, kind of bought into the fact that, okay, we should be backing up our data, they're refusing to pay, refusing to pay the ransomware. And well, then the cyber thieves are actually publishing the data. And he says they're publishing it on both the dark web and, more importantly, on the open web.
Wow.
So, which is putting the company again at huge risk because, can you imagine the fines and the costs from, HIPAA OCR if somebody goes, a breach actor goes and posts your stuff out on the public web, put it on GitHub, whatever they put it on, and your data, your EPHI that you're entrusted to protect, is now published on the open web. The costs are going to be astronomical.
Wow, that's crazy.
He did say, now he made a second comment that I found very intriguing, back to your question and your comment about the cyber insurance. He says they're hearing a lot of cases where, because people have started to really embrace cybersecurity insurance. He says the cyber insurance companies, holders, are getting into negotiations with the bad actors and trying to whittle down the amount of money that gets paid, and then they're paying the ransom demand. And he says most of the times, he says actually he didn't even know of any where they're not, once the insurance company and the bad actors have a communication, they come to an agreement, the money is paid by the cyber insurance, then the data is released. And he said,
wow,
it is, to me, it's kind of crazy. So, but back to your question, as far as if this OFCR, am I saying it right? OFAC, I can't, so many monikers. The Office of Foreign Assets Control, through the U.S. Treasury, the Treasury Department. This is so new. I don't know how it's going to act, and I don't think it would absolve anyone from any risk or liability. If your cyber insurance pays it, they're acting on, I'm not a lawyer.
On your behalf, right. Yeah, we've heard the same thing.
Yeah.
I just wonder what your perspective was.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's going to absolve you of any data risk. You're still the custodian of that data. You still carry the risk. I do not see how having cyber insurance pay it would absolve you of that risk.
Right. The other thing we're seeing a lot now, Doug, is the multiple hits. So we're seeing that if you as a company have paid a ransom, and then you basically, it's like when you donate money to a charity, right? You get on the good list, you're a payer, and then all of a sudden everybody starts coming after you, and we've seen multiple groups hit them after they knew that they paid. They're getting hit by somebody else, and so now companies are getting hit multiple times, which I think is fascinating. In fact, I only saw one this week, I think.
Yes, and I can actually, I can attest to that. I'm personal story here, but I'm on the board of directors of a snowmobile club up in northern Michigan.
Okay.
And we are in a complete volunteer organization. We don't have a very big budget, but we got hit with a cyber attack early last year, and we lost $5,000. And it was basically, it was a perfect storm. It was basically social engineering, and then there was a money transfer that was effectuated. But thank God our treasurer reacted to it afterwards, because right after he transferred the first payment, the $5,000, these emails come, and the person who was acting as our president, who was on vacation, who was away without a cell phone, but the bad actors didn't know that, but it was just pure luck. And they, had forged his email and made it look like it was coming from him. Mm-hmm. So the first payment was made, the only payment, thank God. But the first payment was made, the transfer was done, and then in the matter of day after day after day after day, the bad actors came and said, well, I need your sub-account numbers, I need your balances.
Oh, wow.
I need your exact balances. And thank goodness our treasurer had realized that something wasn't right. And he froze our account. And thank God, because we had just gotten actually, $45,000, $50,000 from a bunch of work that we had done. We get paid back by the state of Michigan for work that we do. So personally, I mean, this was a huge impact on our club. The $5,000 kind of represents our entire year's budget.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making to it is they just kept coming back.
Right.
In the language and the aggressiveness, it went from them trying to pretend to be our president to them becoming very nasty. And
sure. They get very demanding, for sure.
Yeah, and back to that conversation with my buddy at the State Police Cyber this morning. He said the same thing. The repetitive attacks. He said honestly, most of the times when the ransomware's been paid, they stop attacking, but there are cases where it just keeps.
Well, it's other actors usually is what we've noticed.
Yep.
It's not necessarily the same one.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, interesting. There's a question on the forum here too, and I thought it might be interesting for you to answer as well, is what's your perspective on AI to detect a ransomware attack? I have my own perspective, but I'd be interested in yours as well.
That's an interesting, because to me it's almost like shutting the barn door after the horse is out. It's the action is already in play. And
it's not preventative because you're sort of already there. He's already there. Yeah, good point.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I'll go back to the earlier conversation on ransomware. To me, the biggest security thing that you can do, I mean, obviously the standards, multi-factor authentication, security awareness training is huge for your people to help preventing people from getting in, but preventing the bad actors from taking your data, prevent the data exfiltration. Because if they can't get your data out, there's nothing to sell. It goes right back to it's just, it puts it into the position, now it's just a device, whether they're physically there or virtually there. It's just a device. If they can't access your data, because that's what they want. I mean,
that's the crown jewels, I guess, right? Yeah, that's how they make money.
Exactly. This is how they make money. I mean, period. It doesn't matter what it is. This is how they're making money, Yeah,
blackmail, threats, whatever, and just sell it somehow.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that's really great. Well, I just wanted to thank you for your time. I know we're coming up on time right now, but do you have any final thoughts, Doug? I know it's always great to talk to you, and I always learn something new every day I talk to you. It amazes me. But do you have any sort of final thoughts that you'd like to share with the more broader audience here about your experiences?
I really think we're in a crazy time. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here for anybody that's signed on. We're in such a crazy time. And to me, the most important thing is, do your best, show your due diligence, work with your teams. And that goes from the top, your CEO, and all the way down. It's up to us in the cybersecurity industry, and that's what even as a CISO, that's what we do is you put together a whole team from the top to the bottom, engage everybody, and get their buy-in. We can all get, security tooled to death, but some of the key things I think, obviously, I talked about security awareness training is really huge right now because the ransomware attacks are so huge. And, back up your data, multi-factor authentication. Obviously, with Black Fog, the ability to prevent data exfiltration is absolutely huge. That to me is such a security blanket. It's very impressive. So.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your time. Really, I love hearing your insight. And another discussion in the future, I'd like to talk about privacy as well, but I know we don't have time in this particular angle. I know you have some perspective on that too. So again, thanks so much again for your time, Doug, and thanks for sharing it with the rest of the audience. And we'll chat again in the future.
All right. Thanks. Any other questions out there?
Any other questions before we go, guys? I know we've got a few people out there asking a few bits and pieces. I got one maybe you can address before we go, and basically, how do they plan to figure out where cryptocurrency ransoms go to?
You know what? I can only answer that's way above my pay grade because I really don't know. That's the honest answer I can provide.
Right. Yeah, it's very difficult, but the FBI have a really crack team for this sort of stuff, and they spend a lot of time working this out. Yeah. So let's hope they can do that. Well, thank you everyone for your time. Thanks for coming, and hopefully we can do this again in the future.
Bye all. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.